The morning of Elisabeth Smoot's wedding was supposed to be the most beautiful day of her life. She had imagined it so many times, the soft light coming through tall windows, the flowers arranged exactly right, the feeling of stepping into a future she had carefully and lovingly built. She had planned for 14 months. She had chosen every detail with intention, from the shade of cream in the table linens to the particular hymn the soloist would sing during the processional. She had done everything right. She had loved Daniel with the kind of steady, patient devotion that asks for nothing dramatic in return, only presence, only honesty, only the simple courage to show up. He had replied to all of it with a text message. I can't go through with this. I'm sorry. Please don't call. Daniel. 9 words. She had read them 47 times in the 39 minutes since they arrived. She knew because she had counted, standing on the cold edge of the hotel bathroom counter in a dress that had taken 4 months to arrive from a boutique in New York, in a room that smelled like hairspray and white roses and the particular stillness of a morning that had already gone irreversibly wrong. Her maid of honor Renee knocked softly on the bathroom door and told her the guests were arriving. Elisabeth asked for 5 more minutes. Renee gave them to her, retreating with the quiet loyalty of someone who understood that some moments require privacy even when privacy is the last thing the clock allows. Elisabeth looked at herself in the wide mirror above the marble sink. Her makeup was perfect. Her gown was ivory with delicate lace sleeves, fitted at the waist and soft at the hem, exactly the dress she had sketched in the margins of her math notebook at age 12. A single diamond stud caught the light on her right ear. She looked like a bride. She felt like the aftermath of something. She thought about walking out there. About the 300 guests already settling into white chairs. About the pastor at the altar with his open Bible and his good intentions. About her mother's face, proud, hopeful, dressed in the pale blue she had agonized over for weeks, and what that face would do when the news arrived. She thought about Daniel's mother, who had called twice and was probably asking about parking. She thought about the centerpieces and the rehearsal dinner and the 14 months and the 9 words, and then she stopped thinking about all of it because thinking about all of it at once was the kind of thing that dropped a person to the floor. She smoothed her dress. She straightened her spine. She slipped her phone into the hidden pocket of her gown, took $43 in cash from her small bridal clutch and tucked it beside the phone, and walked out of the bathroom with her chin level and her eyes dry with the particular dryness of someone refusing, by sheer act of will, to come apart before they have reached the door. She remembered the service corridor. Her venue coordinator had pointed it out during the walkthrough months ago, offhand, the way you mention things you never expect to need. She found it without difficulty, followed it to the side exit, and pushed the door open into the September morning. The air was cool and sharp and entirely indifferent to her circumstances. She stood in the quiet alley behind the Grand Harlow Hotel and breathed it in, the clean, ordinary outside air, and for a moment she simply stood there, a woman in an ivory wedding dress with nowhere specific to be, blinking against the sudden daylight and trying to remember what came next. That was when she heard the voice. "You look like someone who just made a very difficult decision." She turned. Leaning against a sleek black car parked just beyond the alley entrance was a man she had never seen before. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit him with the effortless precision of something made specifically for him. Dark hair, sharp jaw, and eyes that were a quiet, steady shade of gray. He wasn't smiling, not exactly, but there was something in his expression that was neither amusement nor pity. Something closer to recognition. Like he understood, from the inside, what it felt like to stand in an exit you hadn't planned on using. Elisabeth straightened. "I beg your pardon." He nodded toward her gown. "The dress. The exit. The look on your face." A pause. "I'm not judging. I almost did the same thing once." She stared at him. "Who are you?" He pushed off the car and extended his hand with the kind of composure that suggested he was rarely caught off guard by anything. "Patrick Craig." The name landed somewhere in the back of her mind, familiar in the vague way names sometimes are when you've encountered them in passing. A headline, maybe. A magazine cover. Something in the business section of a newspaper she had skimmed in a waiting room. But she was too unraveled to chase the memory. She shook his hand because her mother had raised her with manners that survived catastrophe. Elisabeth Smoot. Are you all right, Elisabeth Smoot? It was such a plain, direct question, and she had absolutely no honest answer for it. No, she said. Not even a little. He nodded, as if that was the most reasonable thing she could have said. Then he opened the back door of the car and said, with quiet and unhurried certainty, "Then let me get you somewhere that isn't here. Before we go further, have you ever had a moment where everything fell apart at the worst possible time, and you had to hold yourself together anyway? Drop it in the comments. You're not alone." Patrick Craig didn't ask questions. That was the first thing she noticed as the car pulled smoothly away from the hotel, leaving behind the decorated hall and the 300 guests and the unanswered texts already accumulating on her phone. He sat across from her in the spacious back seat and looked out the window with the kind of composed silence that didn't demand anything. No explanation. No consolation. No fumbling for the right words. Just space, clean and quiet and unexpectedly generous. Elisabeth stared at her hands. Her engagement ring was still on her finger. She hadn't thought to remove it. It caught the light every few seconds, winking at her like a small, cruel reminder, and she twisted it off and dropped it into her purse without ceremony. They ended up at the Harlow Prestige, the quieter sister property 2 blocks away, and Patrick arranged a suite on the 14th floor with wide windows overlooking the city and a sitting room that was warm and still and mercifully free of flowers. A staff member brought tea without being asked. Elisabeth sat on the cream sofa and finally, for the first time since the text arrived, let her shoulders drop. What she didn't know, what she had no way of knowing, standing in that alley with grief still fresh on her face, was exactly who Patrick Craig was beyond a name and a well-fitted suit. She would learn it later, in pieces, and each piece would shift something slightly in her understanding of the morning. Patrick Craig was 34 years old and worth, by the most conservative estimates, somewhere north of $4 billion. He was the founder and CEO of Craig Global Ventures, a private investment firm with holdings in real estate, technology, and infrastructure across 12 countries. His name appeared regularly in Forbes, occasionally in gossip columns, and almost never attached to scandal, because Patrick Craig was, above everything else, extraordinarily careful. He had grown up in Connecticut, the only child of a civil engineer and a schoolteacher who had been quietly, stubbornly in love for 31 years and who had given him 2 things above all else, the value of hard work, and the importance of showing up for people when it mattered. He had been engaged once, 3 years ago. A woman named Sylvia who was brilliant and who had ultimately decided that his ambition was a wall she couldn't live behind. She hadn't sent a text. She had sat across from him at a dinner table and told him the truth, and he had respected her for it even as it broke something in him that took a long time to name. Since then he had poured himself into work with the clean and controllable satisfaction of someone who had decided, quietly and without drama, that romance was something that happened to other people. He had only been at the Grand Harlow that morning because of a property meeting. A development group wanted to acquire the building and Patrick's firm had been asked to evaluate it. The meeting ended early. He was about to get into his car when the side door opened and a woman in an ivory dress stepped into the alley looking like someone who had just survived something. His instinct, cultivated carefully over years of guarded living, was to say nothing, to leave people to their own private storms. But there was something about the way she stood. Spine straight, chin up, eyes dry with the particular dryness of someone refusing to fall apart. She reminded him, with a force he hadn't anticipated, of himself. The morning after Sylvia left, suit already on, standing in his own apartment and refusing to let the ground swallow him. So he had spoken. And now here they were, in a 14th floor sitting room with tea going cold between them, and she was telling him she needed to call her mother, and he was saying her mother might surprise her, and she was saying he didn't know her mother, and the corner of his mouth moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile but was something near enough that it made the room feel slightly warmer. She asked him about the thing he'd said in the alley, about almost doing the same thing once. He told her about Sylvia in the plain, settled way people speak about things they have genuinely made peace with. She left first, he said. Saved him the decision. It was the right ending for the wrong story. And maybe, he said, hers would turn out to be the same. She wasn't ready to believe that yet. But she filed it away somewhere quiet, like a note she wasn't prepared to open. The mistake happened on a Tuesday. Technically it happened because of a filing error, a distracted county clerk named Gerald, and the fact that Elisabeth and Patrick had both signed documents in the same private suite at the Harlow Prestige on the same afternoon, Elisabeth signing the formal cancellation paperwork for her wedding venue contract, and Patrick signing the closing documents for a real estate acquisition that his legal team had arranged through the same hotel's business center. Gerald, who was 61 years old and 2 weeks from retirement and profoundly overworked, processed the wrong set of signatures against the wrong set of documents. It took 9 days for anyone to notice. In those 9 days, Elisabeth had been rebuilding herself one careful hour at a time. She had moved into Renee's apartment, that warm and cluttered 2-bedroom in Covington where the bookshelves were overfull and the kitchen always smelled like something good. She had called her mother, 2 hours, tears on both ends, and ultimately her mother saying, "Baby, if he could leave you with a text message then he was never worthy of the dress." She had returned Daniel's ring by courier with no note attached. She had taken 4 days off work at the architecture firm where she was a junior associate and then gone back because staying still felt worse than moving forward. She was at her desk on a Thursday morning, reviewing floor plans for a community center project, when her phone rang with an unknown number. A woman named Carol Dennings from the law offices of Hargrove and Associates. Professional. Brisk. Asking about documents signed at the Harlow Prestige on September 14th. And then, after a pause that preceded information requiring a seated position, Carol Dennings asked whether Elisabeth was somewhere private. The conference room at Hargrove and Associates that afternoon was clean and neutral and corporate, and Patrick was already there when she arrived, standing at the window with his hands in his pockets and the posture of a man who had just received extraordinary news and was processing it with characteristic restraint. He turned when she walked in. His expression was composed, but there was a flicker behind his gray eyes, something between disbelief and reluctant dark humor, that made her feel fractionally better about the fact that she had laughed for a full 30 seconds in her car before the panic arrived. Because what Carol Dennings had explained, in precise legal language, was this: due to a clerical error at the county records office, the marriage license Elisabeth had obtained for her original wedding, which she had never formally voided, had been processed and recorded against the documents Patrick Craig had signed that same afternoon. On paper, in the eyes of the state of Ohio, Elisabeth Smoot and Patrick Craig were married. "This is," Elisabeth said, setting her bag on the table and looking directly at him, "genuinely the most absurd thing that has ever happened to me." "It's in the top 3 for me," Patrick said. "Possibly top 2. The annulment was straightforward," Carol explained. "Both parties appear before a judge, signatures on the appropriate documents, and the error is corrected. Cleanest legal path given that it had been officially recorded. The earliest available date, given current court schedules, was 6 weeks from today." 6 weeks. They looked at each other across the conference table, this woman who had fled her own wedding 9 days ago and this man who had offered her a way through it, and the room was very quiet. "Well," Patrick said, in the same unhurried tone he brought to everything. "This is an unusual situation." "That," Elisabeth said, "is a significant understatement. Here's something to think about. Have you ever had something go completely wrong and somehow end up exactly where you were supposed to be? We'd love to hear it in the comments below. The 6 weeks were not supposed to matter. That was what Elisabeth told herself. They were a legal formality. A waiting period. The administrative tail end of an accident that would be corrected and forgotten and eventually become the kind of story you tell at dinner parties with the cautious humor of hindsight. That was what she told herself. And then Patrick called on a Saturday morning at 8:47, not through Carol, not through legal channels, but directly, from his own number, and said he had a problem and needed her professional opinion. He was looking at a historic building on Elm Street, 1920s construction, 3 proposals from 3 firms and none of them were respecting the original structure. Renee had mentioned she specialized in adaptive reuse. He would compensate her at her standard consulting rate. It was such a Patrick Craig thing to say, practical, unsentimental, no performance around it, that she found herself smiling before she had decided to. She told him to send the proposals. She would take a look. And that was how it began, the way most things that matter begin, quietly, without announcement, through an ordinary door that turns out to open onto something extraordinary. Over the next 3 weeks they met 4 times. Twice at the Elm Street building, which had bones that Elisabeth recognized immediately as remarkable, original terracotta detailing, proportions that the later renovations had buried but not destroyed, the kind of architectural integrity that makes a preservation architect feel something close to reverence. And twice at a small coffee place near her office where the tables were close and the background noise was exactly right for conversation. Patrick listened the way few people did, completely, without interrupting, without preparing his response while she was still talking. He asked questions that were precise and genuine. He pushed back when he disagreed, not to win but because he actually wanted to understand. And he told her things about his work and his thinking that she sensed he didn't share widely, not because he was performing openness, but because he had simply, somewhere in these weeks, decided she was someone worth being honest with. Elisabeth, who had spent 11 months carefully loving a man who had answered it with 9 words and a period, found herself doing something she had not planned to do for a very long time. She looked forward to seeing him. The quiet warmth of it arrived without announcement, a lightness that appeared when his name showed up on her phone screen, a particular quality of attention she gave to getting ready on the mornings she knew she'd see him. She didn't name it. She was careful not to. She was not ready to name it. And then Daniel called. He sounded tired and genuine and exactly the way he always sounded when he was sorry, because Daniel had always been very good at being sorry. He said he had panicked. He said he had made the worst mistake of his life. He said he had thought about her every day and he was asking, he knew he didn't deserve it but he was asking, for another chance. Elisabeth stood at her apartment window and watched the street below and felt something she hadn't expected, not longing, not confusion, not the pull she might have anticipated 3 weeks ago. Mostly she felt clarity. Clean and quiet and certain, the way clarity arrives when you have been honestly paying attention to yourself. She told him she had to go. She ended the call. And then she called Patrick. He was there in 20 minutes. She told him about the call over 2 cups of coffee she barely touched, and he listened the whole way through without interrupting. When she finished, he asked what she wanted to do, not what she was going to do, not what he thought she should do, but what she wanted. She said she didn't know yet, but she had wanted to tell him. And he looked at her and said, "Thank you for telling me," in a way that made it clear that it mattered to him, that she mattered to him, in a way that settled something restless in her chest that had been moving for weeks. She named the warmth that evening, alone in her apartment. Quietly, to herself, without drama. She named it and sat with it and found that it did not frighten her as much as she had expected. 2 days later a photograph appeared on a Cincinnati lifestyle blog. Someone at the Elm Street property had recognized Patrick, and the image, grainy, taken from across the street, showed the 2 of them in the building's doorway, his head bent toward hers as she pointed at something in the stonework above the entrance. The caption said, "Billionaire Patrick Craig's mystery companion, who is she?" By morning it had been picked up by 2 larger outlets. By evening Elisabeth had 17 notifications, a string of escalating texts from her mother, and the particular sensation of a private life suddenly pressed against glass. Patrick called at 9 that night. He apologized immediately, this was his world bleeding into hers and he was sorry. She said it was okay, even though her hands weren't entirely steady. And then he told her the annulment date had been moved up. A judge had a cancellation. They could appear Thursday and end this, if that was what she wanted. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside her window, Cincinnati moved through its ordinary evening. Headlights. Someone's music from a passing car. The city, indifferent and beautiful, just living. "Is that what you want?" she asked quietly. The pause that followed was the longest he had ever given her. "No," he said. "It is not." Thursday came anyway, but they weren't in a courtroom. Patrick had called Carol before Elisabeth woke up and declined the rescheduled date, returning them to the original 6-week window. He told her matter-of-factly when he called that morning. He had pushed it back. They had 3 weeks left. He would like to use them honestly. Honestly meaning, he said, that he wanted to take her to dinner. Not as a legal complication and not as a professional contact. As the woman he had been thinking about since he found her in an alley in a wedding dress. She stood in her kitchen in her pajamas with the phone to her ear and felt the full weight of what he was offering, not just dinner, but the courage of directness, the specific bravery of saying what you actually mean to someone who matters. She had been waiting, without realizing it, for someone to speak that plainly. "Dinner," she said. "Tonight, if you're free." She looked around her kitchen. At the architectural drawings pinned above her counter. At the life she had been quietly and stubbornly rebuilding since September. At the window where October had turned the street trees amber and gold. "I'm free," she said. They ate at a small Italian place in Hyde Park that had been in the same family for 30 years and smelled like garlic and candle wax and unhurried contentment. They talked for 3 hours. Not about the property, not about the legal situation, not about Daniel or Sylvia or any of the accumulated difficulty that had brought them to this particular evening. They talked about her parents' narrow craftsman house in Dayton with the porch that leaned slightly to the left. About the Cincinnati Music Hall at age 9, and how its Gothic revival facade had made her understand for the first time that beauty was structural, something you could build with your hands. About his father, who had died 4 years ago from a stroke that came without warning on an ordinary Tuesday, and how Patrick still reached for his phone sometimes to call him when something significant happened. About the way success had arrived slowly and then all at once, and how the all-at-once part had been the loneliest, because the question underneath everything, does any of this matter, never went away on its own. "What makes it matter?" she asked, leaning forward slightly, the candle between them warm and still. He looked at her. "People," he said. "The right ones. That's always been the answer." She held his gaze. He held hers. And something inside Elisabeth Smoot that had been careful and guarded and sensible made a quiet, irreversible decision. Walking back to her car in the October night, Patrick fell into step beside her naturally, the way people do when they've decided without discussing it that they don't want the evening to end. At her car she turned. She told him that when Daniel had called and she had told him about it, the reason she had called Patrick right after wasn't just because she needed someone to talk to. It was because he was the person she wanted to talk to. Specifically him. She thought he should know that. He was quiet for a moment. Then he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, gently, deliberately, like something he had been waiting to do. "I know," he said softly. "I've known for a little while." She asked, "And?" He said he was standing outside on a Thursday night in October with a 7 a.m. call the next morning and he didn't want to leave. She laughed, surprised and genuine and warm. He said he was working on being more romantic. And then he smiled, fully, the kind of smile that reached his gray eyes completely, and it rearranged something in the air between them that stayed rearranged. 3 days later she called Carol Dennings and asked, plainly, what it would look like legally if two people decided not to pursue an annulment, if they decided to let the marriage stand while they figured things out properly. Carol said, with faint warmth beneath her professional composure, that it would look like a marriage. Elisabeth thanked her, sat with the answer for the rest of the day, turned it over and let herself be afraid of it, and then found herself more excited than afraid, which was how she knew it was real. Then she called Patrick and told him she had talked to Carol and she thought they should discuss not getting an annulment. He said he thought so too. The annulment date came and went like an ordinary Thursday. No courtroom. No judge. No signatures on documents designed to undo what Gerald had accidentally made permanent. Just a quiet phone call from Carol confirming that both parties had elected not to proceed, and a mutual understanding that something accidental had become, somewhere along the way, something chosen. They took it slowly, not because what they felt was uncertain, but because what they felt was real, and real things deserve to be built with care. October became a season of unhurried discovery. Long Saturday mornings at the coffee place. Evenings at the Elm Street building, where Elisabeth was now formally the lead on the adaptive reuse project and was uncovering original details beneath decades of renovation, pressed tin ceilings, a mosaic floor beneath layers of linoleum, a walnut banister on the staircase that made her gasp the first time she saw it. "You look happy," Patrick said one afternoon, watching her run her hand along the banister's curve. "I am happy," she said, and meant it without qualification for the first time in what felt like years. She met his mother Margaret in November, warm, precise, with strong opinions about architecture and the kind of eyes that look at you long enough to actually see you. Margaret took her hands when they were introduced and held them for a moment and said, "He called me after the first week, and he never calls in the middle of a workday." She looked at her son. "Whatever you did, keep doing it." Patrick looked at the ceiling with an endearingly mortified expression and Elisabeth laughed until she had to set down her teacup. He met Renee over a dinner that lasted 5 hours because Renee asked extremely direct questions and Patrick answered them with honest calm until Renee sat back and said, "Okay, I believe you," which Elisabeth knew was the highest possible endorsement Renee was capable of giving. Daniel wrote a letter. Handwritten, careful, genuinely remorseful. Elisabeth read it all the way through because that was the right thing to do, sat with it for a day, and then wrote back a short kind note wishing him well and meaning it. She told Patrick. He listened and asked how she felt. She said finished, in a good way, like a door closing that needed to close. He said good, and she looked at him and waited for more, and he said what else would he say? She had handled it, she hadn't needed his opinion, she had needed him to listen, so he had listened. And she thought, not for the first time, that there is a particular kind of strength in a person who understands the difference between being needed and being present, and who chooses presence, quietly, every time. And here's our final question for you. Have you ever had something happen completely by accident that turned out to be exactly what you needed? Leave your story in the comments. Because sometimes the best chapters of our lives are the ones we never saw coming. They married properly in April. Small ceremony, immediate family and closest friends only. The venue was the Elm Street building, halfway through its conversion and breathtakingly beautiful, the pressed tin ceiling restored, the mosaic floor uncovered and polished, the walnut banister gleaming in afternoon light. Elisabeth had designed the space. Of course she had. She wore a different dress. Something simple and entirely her own, with no history attached to it, no 14 months of careful planning, just a dress she loved on a morning she had chosen deliberately. Her mother cried. Renee cried. Margaret Craig did not cry but squeezed Elisabeth's hand for a long moment before the ceremony and said nothing at all, which said everything. Patrick stood at the end of the room that Elisabeth had helped rebuild, and he watched her walk toward him with those steady gray eyes and something in his face so open and unguarded that she had to take a breath to keep her own composure. When she reached him he took her hands. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi," she said. "You look. Don't make me cry before we've even started." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Beautiful," he said. "You look beautiful, Elisabeth." She did not manage to avoid the tears. Neither, she noticed, did he. Later, much later, after the ceremony and the dinner and the toasts and Renee's speech that somehow made everyone laugh and cry in the same breath, they stood together on the unfinished upper floor of the Elm Street building, looking out at the Cincinnati skyline through windows that still needed their frames. The April night was cool and the city glittered below them, indifferent and gorgeous and entirely unaware of what had transpired inside these particular walls. Elisabeth leaned her head against Patrick's shoulder. He rested his cheek against the top of her head. "Gerald," she said. He made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Gerald. We should send him something." "I already did. Last month." She lifted her head. "You sent the county clerk a gift. A very nice one." The ghost of a smile. "He retired. I thought he deserved acknowledgement." She stared at him for a moment, and then she laughed, the full, unguarded kind that comes from somewhere real, and he watched her with that open, unhurried warmth he now gave her without reservation, the way he gave her most things, without performance, without condition, without holding anything back. She thought about the girl who had sat on a hotel bathroom counter on a September morning in an ivory dress, reading 9 words from a man who hadn't been brave enough, feeling like the aftermath of something. She felt enormous tenderness for that girl. She had not deserved what happened to her. But she had walked out of that bathroom with her spine straight, and the door she pushed open had led her, through an alley, through a filing error, through a distracted and overworked county clerk 2 weeks from retirement, here. To this building she was helping restore. To this man who listened like it was the most important thing he had to do. To this life she had not planned and would not trade. She had married a billionaire by mistake. She was keeping him on purpose. And somewhere in a quiet house in Connecticut, in a frame on a shelf beside a 31-year anniversary photo, 2 people who had raised their son to work hard and show up for people when it mattered would have recognized, without needing it explained, exactly what that looked like. It looked like love. The real kind. The kind that arrives not on schedule, not in the form you expected, but through the door you didn't know you needed to open, steady, unhurried, and entirely worth the wait. And that, dear friends, is the beautiful, unexpected, wonderfully accidental love story of Elisabeth Smoot and Patrick Craig. Sometimes life doesn't go according to plan. Sometimes the door slams shut on everything you thought you wanted, and what's waiting on the other side of that closed door is so much better than anything you could have written for yourself. Elisabeth didn't plan to flee her own wedding. She didn't plan to meet a quiet man with gray eyes in an alley. She certainly didn't plan to accidentally marry a billionaire through a filing error and a distracted county clerk named Gerald. But every single wrong turn led her exactly where she was supposed to be. And maybe, just maybe, that's true for all of us. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. It truly means the world to us that you spent your time here, inside this story, with these characters. We don't take that for granted, not even for a single second. If this story moved you, made you smile, gave you chills, or reminded you of something real in your own life, please take a moment to like this video. It costs you nothing and it means everything to us. Leave a comment below and tell us, which moment in the story hit you the hardest. Was it Elisabeth walking out of that alley? The filing error that changed everything? Or Patrick's quiet, steady love that arrived without announcement and stayed without condition? We genuinely want to know. We read every single comment. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell, because we have so many more stories coming your way. Stories full of love, second chances, unexpected twists, and the kind of endings that remind you that life, even at its most broken, has a way of turning beautiful. We are just getting started, and trust us, you do not want to miss what's coming next. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And until next time, keep believing that the best chapters of your story are still ahead. We'll see you in the next one.